if my calculation is correct, this is our last evening together. It's true. So the retreat will continue after tomorrow. It's just going to be a little different when you leave here. But and you're all going to leave with something that has some juice in it, some power in it, and it's the energy and the power of Bodhicitta. It's a personal, transformational energy, and it also has the power to transform the world that we live in. So that's what I want to talk about tonight. It's a good kind of ending from speaking with many of you. Really had interactions where your heart is opening in ways that are kind of wonderful and new. And so, Bodhicitta. Bodhi means awakened, and citta means, it's translated a couple ways, thought or intention or spirit or heart-mind. Okay? So Bodhicitta, the spirit or awakened heart-mind. It's an altruistic energy that you can feel, and it's palpable. And when it's full and powerful, it feels like you want to live your life in a different way. It saturates you in a sense. So this bodhicitta energy, which is a desire to be of service to others, is really what it is. And it's talked about in two ways. There's a relative bodhicitta or absolute bodhicitta. And relative bodhicitta, very kind of ground level bodhicitta, simply means compassion, the quivering of the heart in response to suffering, our own or someone else's. And absolute, the level of bodhicitta that's the absolute level of bodhicitta is the empty nature of the mind itself. So we're going to explore both of those. And one of Buddhism's most interesting, salient characteristics is this relationship, and we've been talking about it this week, between dukkha and anatta, the unsatisfactoriness, stress, etc., and selflessness. And this week we've been, this sense of self, it's a psychosocial construct. It's convenient, seemingly necessary, but because it's a construct, it's pretty unstable, or completely unstable, actually. And so we've talked about looking for permanence in this construct of self, and can't find it. Okay. Another way to frame this selflessness or anatta, and it's a claim that not self is the claim of no separation. That's really what it is. So, can everybody see the cloud in this piece of paper? Right? You know the story. The cloud in the piece of paper. Where does the paper come from? It comes from a tree. What do trees need? Soil, sun, moisture. Where does moisture come from? It comes from rain. Where does the rain come from? It comes from a cloud. So there's obviously a cloud in this paper. So it's implied that there's interbeing. And if we think about it, and we've given, examples of it this week, it's kind of fun to think about. And it can assuage some of our loneliness. We start kind of reflecting on how nothing is singularly alone and having arisen from non-connection. Everything is connected to everything else. So our ancestors back and back and back and all through evolution, we get back to the actual forming of the single cell, where out of the soup there was a wall that formed and became a cell. And before that, everything back to the Big Bang. We needed all those elements to be there. Calcium, nitrogen, carbon, oxygen. And then when there had to be fusion, and this stuff got scattered all over the universe. And so this incredible, every moment, it can be, sometimes I feel awestruck when I think, okay, this moment, what do I represent? Not in an inflated way, but all these causes and conditions of the universe, not just in my family, not just in the fact that my parents got together one night and got all hot and frisky and there I was. It's like the culmination of everything. Each of us right here. We landed in this world and it's constructed out of phenomena everywhere we look and reflect on. Everything is the cause of everything else. Everything's the effect of everything else. This is this cosmic vision. I talked about Indra's net the other evening with the nodes at each crossroads and this vast cosmic net of which nothing is outside of it. And so the difference for any of the jeweled nodes between samsara and nirvana, heaven or hell, delusion or enlightenment, is whether that particular node feels separate from the rest of the net. Or whether there's realization, and realization in the big word, that everything really is reflecting everything else. That's realization. So this interdependence, it does point to emptiness, but not some kind of depressing thing. It's not some washed out, gray, vacuum, collapsing dullness kind of thing. It's not that. But simply empty of an independent, separate self. That's the emptiness. Okay? Now I want to do a little meditation with you all. Actually, I'll go for a few minutes. So, kind of close your eyes, settle in. Take some deep breaths. Full breaths, and then a nice long exhale. Let all the air come out. 3 or 4 times. Settle in, feeling again, arriving in this body, feeling the aliveness. And I'm going to say a few times a description of the mind. I'm going to quote a description of the mind by the Tibetan teacher Shabkar. See if you can feel into what he's getting at viscerally as I give this description. He says this: the mind's nature is vivid as a flawless piece of crystal, intrinsically empty, naturally radiant, and ceaselessly responsive. The mind's nature is vivid as a flawless piece of crystal, intrinsically empty, naturally radiant, and ceaselessly responsive. So we'll continue with this meditation. Feeling again the aliveness. Sounds, sensations, emotions, thoughts, all arising and passing in the vast field of awareness. All known by awareness. All those arisings. Relax back softly into that field of awareness. Awareness is empty, transparent, vast, unstained, vivid, it holds and is the knowing presence for all phenomena, but is not made of them. It holds and is the knowing presence of all phenomena, but is not made of them. Rest back gently and experience the nature of awareness. Intrinsically empty, radiant, illumined, relaxing deeply, experiencing directly the nature of awareness. Vivid as a flawless piece of crystal. Empty of self. Ceaselessly responsive. Resting gently. The slight backward shift. Resting in the radiant, open-hearted awareness. Okay, in that little reflection we did, there was a pointing towards the absence of self-centeredness. Simply awareness knowing the arising and passing of phenomena. In a sense, we could say nature knowing itself. So the question, there's a fundamental question. How hard are you gripping onto that sense of self as the center point of your life? Are you creating or holding to a center reference point for your experience, all that you think and sense and feel? Are you mostly thinking as a node in a vast cosmic net that you're very separate and solid? It's easy for us to fall into self-centeredness. It's like gravity. When it's like this self-centered point gets activated, you start to circle around it closer and closer, kind of like a space junk kind of falling into the gravity, and eventually it's right there. We get all shut in with our worries, hopes, fears, plans. Everything gets referenced from a narrower and narrower space. It just happens. You lose perspective. Mindfulness escapes. And at those times, it seems like our whole life revolves around getting the next thing that we want. Getting the next desire satisfied. Whatever it might be. Grasping the thing or the experience or the person. Or on the other hand, getting rid of the thing, the experience, or the person. And there's this subconscious belief we've talked about that, if we could pull that off, maybe this self will finally be satisfied and be happy forever. The great beauty of this practice, as we explore it little by little, more into the more subtle elements of it, is that you actually come to see the futility of that belief, that we actually can satisfy the self. Okay? But we're humans. Frail and wonderful humans. And so over and over we feel ourselves pulled into that gravitational self-referencing point, to that little tight orbit. And then we end up trying to, endlessly gratify it, defend it, inflate it. So there are times we're just locked in, all the way in for a while. But through this practice, just the patient, kind, careful attention that we're paying over and over again, investigating these hearts and minds, penetrating sometimes a little deeper, feeling the heart open, experiencing directly really the subtle aspects of being alive, right into awareness itself, maybe the most subtle of experiences. And from that base, you get a glimpse, an experience of the empty nature of self. And you get a visceral experience or taste of what the Buddha's main instructions were, the very most main instructions. Nothing whatsoever is to be clung to as I or mine. Nothing whatsoever is to be clung to as I or I. Basic foundational instructions. And so in some moments that confining power of the egocentric field, it lightens up. It actually does lighten up. I mean, many of you have had that experience this week. It feels like all of a sudden there's more air. Things are fresher, clearer. There's more fluidity, there's ease. And whatever the constraints were that were holding you into that gravitational field, they just take flight. It's like the universe opens. I think Rilke had this in mind when he wrote this. It's called Buddha in Glory. I'm sure many of you have heard it. Center of all centers, core of cores, almond, self-enclosed, and growing sweet. All this universe, to the furthest stars, all beyond them, is your flesh, your fruit. Now you feel how nothing clings to you. Your vast shell reaches into endless space, and there the rich, thick fluids rise and flow, illumined in your infinite peace. Illumined in your infinite peace, 1 billion stars go spinning through the night, blazing high above your head. But in you is the presence that will be when all the stars are dead. So you begin to look into, to glimpse, experience this vast radiance of mind, boundless. It's clear, unconstrained. And in those moments we really touch in and feel that full emptiness of self. Resting more and more in the vastness, more and more moments there. That field of emptiness. Have you ever had the good fortune of spending time around somebody or, people or teachers who are empty in this way? It's like you can almost kind of reach in there and there's like nobody there. Just being in their field, we can start to feel this emptiness, certain people. And to this end, many of you know who Bhante Gunaratana is. He's still alive in his late 80s. Now has a kind of forest monastery in West Virginia. Became a monk when he was 11. Did a lot of great service. He's Sri Lankan. He worked in leper colonies in India. He then was sent to the United States, set up a vihara in Washington, D.C., got his PhD in comparative religion or something. And then getting back to his roots, he wanted to get back to a forest monastery. That's where he began, so they got a little land in West Virginia. And I consider him an absolute world treasure. No mistake about it. Right up in the level kind of with the Dalai Lama. So, as it turned out, some of the other monks and the administrators at his place thought he needed some R&R. He never thinks he needs R&R. I mean, why would I rest, he would say. So, they sent him to my house. And so, he was with me for 3 or 4 days. And we were just hanging out. And we would, he would do his 3 hours, sit in the morning. And then he would need time on his computer because he was writing 3 books at once, going from one to the other. And he'd say, I'm not going to finish these. I'll be dead, but maybe somebody will. That was kind of his attitude. He's about probably 80 at the time. And we go on these long walks. He loved to go on these long walks. And where I live, there's these hills. I don't live too far from here, but there's a lot of hills. We'd take the dogs, and he'd play with the dogs, and interested in everything in nature. And we'd just hang out, and I'd make him food. And, we had some Dharma discussions, but a lot of it was just like, kind of like stuff. But after about a day or so, I started feeling like I was stoned. Like really like high. I was like, what's the deal here? But it was just being in his field together, not doing anything special, no secret mantras or anything. We're just in the field together. We didn't even meditate together. We meditated in the room that I gave him. It was just me and him in the house at the time. So it's very inspiring and quite an effect. Meister Eckhart, the 13th century Christian mystic, he says, the outward man is the swinging door. The inner man is the still hinge. The outward man is the swinging door. The inner man is the still hinge. I think we all know what he's getting at. In an interview, Mother Teresa was asked, what do you say to God when you pray? And she replied, well, I don't say anything, I just listen. And then the interviewer said, well, what does God say to you? And she said, he doesn't say anything, and if you don't understand that, I can't explain it. So that little spit of a woman, just quiet, listening, really listening to listening, resting in emptiness of self, emptiness of mind, open, awake. So last night I'm going to tell a lot of stories. So this is one of my favorite stories out of the Pali Canon, and it's a story about Bahia of the bark cloth. And there's a certain amount of information in the sutta, but from other sources, I kind of gleaned the kind of earlier parts of the story. So Bahia, back in the time of the Buddha, was a merchant, purportedly reasonably successful, and he lived somewhere in southern India, and he wanted to relocate and take his whole business, everything he owned, he put it on a ship, and of course weather reporting wasn't the best then, so they're out in this ship kind of sailing up the Indian Ocean kind of to the north, and they hit a big storm. The ship goes down, everything is lost, everybody is on the ship is lost. He makes it to shore, his clothes have been stripped off in the surf and in the reef and everything, and he's cut and bruised. So there he is, naked on this deserted beach. And so he, it's a little Robinson Crusoe thing is beginning to happen. So he also, modest, wants to cover himself. So he gets some bark off some trees, and he gets some vines, and he, makes himself some covering. He's walking along the beach, and he notices a path. Path looks like it's a worn path. Maybe it goes to a village or something. So he walks into the village. And it was very common in those years for wandering sadhus, holy people, to show up. And this was a really out of the place. Hardly anybody showed up there. And this guy just appeared. And so they thought, wow, this is somebody. He just kind of appeared out of nowhere. And maybe he came out of the ocean or whatever. And so they started treating him like an enlightened holy man. Okay? Now, he didn't say anything to disabuse them. It was like, this is a pretty good gig. They bring me food. I've got shelter. Everybody likes me, And so he probably generated enough platitudes to keep it going, And so he's sleeping one night, and he gets visited by I guess at this point maybe he was a deva from another realm of existence, one of the heaven realms that Leela was talking about, who has his cousin in this life who had passed away and really loved him, really loved Bahia and really always looked out for his best interest. And so he came and visited him, and in a dream or in an apparition or something. And essentially he said, look, dude, you ain't no arhat. You're not enlightened. This scam is not getting you anywhere. But I know a guy who knows a guy. Not exactly. I know a guy who's teaching up in the northern part of this area that really does know the truth and can communicate it and really can open you up. And so he kind of takes that advice and he packs up all the nothing that he has and he starts walking. It's like 1,000 miles or 1,500 miles from where he was on the coast all the way to where, and he said he's near a town called Savatthi. So, and he's feeling some urgency all the way. It's like this is growing of greater and greater importance in his mind. And so he gets up there and he arrives in the encampment where the Buddha's students have all been camping. And he says, well, where's the teacher, the venerable teacher? They say, well, he's in town on alms round. He'll be back in a few hours. And he said, no, I need to see him now. So he goes into town and they're all kind of meandering through slowly with their bowls, etc. And people are coming. And he comes right up in front of the Buddha and he says, well, oh, Venerable Sir, I feel this urgency. Please teach me the Dhamma. Teach me the Dhamma right now. And the Buddha said, no, I'm on alms rounds. See you later. So a little bit flustered, he backs off. And a few minutes later, he asks again. The Buddha, patient fellow, but no, not now. And as you know, in these spiritual things, the third time that he asks, the Buddha said, all right. So this is what the Buddha tells him, in all his urgency. He says this to Bahia. In what is seen, there should be just the seen. In what is heard, there should be just the heard. In what is sensed, there should be just the sensed. In what is thought, there should be just the thought. This, Bahia, is how you should train yourself. And when, Bahia, there is for you in the seen only the seen, in the heard only the heard, in the cognized only the cognized, then, Bahia, there is no you in connection with all that. When, Bahia, there is no you in connection with that, there is no you there. And when, Bahia, there is no you, and when, Bahia, there is no you there, then, Bahia, you are neither here nor there, nor between the two. This, just this, is the end of suffering. Okay? And as all these stories go, he got it. And in that moment, he was free, awake, and the little rest of the story is interesting too. He was feeling this urgency, okay, all through this. And very soon after, I'm not sure if it was a day or the same day or whatever, right after, he gets run down by a cow and her calf and killed, And so the Buddha then arranged for a special ceremony for an enlightened being, and he told all this Sangha. Bahia had heard and understood the Dhamma, and so that's the story of Bahia and the bark cloth. Okay? So just that awareness knowing activity, knowing phenomena. Just the knowing, without constructs or stuff in between. This from Rumi. Live in the nowhere that you come from, even though you have an address here. Okay? That's the beautiful paradox of this practice. To come to know the nowhere that you come from, even though you got your feet on the ground, you're working in relationships, got all these activities, you got all these worldly joys, sorrows, gains, losses, the whole thing. You know? And when you get a taste of this interdependence of all things and the intrinsic emptiness of self, what happens is that compassion arises spontaneously. It's the natural response to the wisdom heart-mind. You know, the mind's nature is as vivid as a flawless piece of crystal. Intrinsically empty and ceaselessly responsive. And somebody asks in a meeting, well, what's the difference between empathy and compassion? Is it the same thing? And it's really not. Compassion is, maybe it's a cut above. I mean, empathy is beautiful. It's just, you know, it's a feeling for another's difficulty. Or your own difficulty. It's a feeling for that. But compassion, you know, as we've said, it has movement in it. It's a verb. There's motivation to do something, to reach out. You know, what can I do to help? That stirring of the heart to do something, that's the relative bodhicitta. It's from Meister Eckhart again. You may call God love, you may call God goodness, but the best name for God is compassion. And this from Norman Fisher, the Zen teacher. He says, we have all sorts of needs, and we can pile them up. When self-concern is our major motivation, it requires a high level of cooperation from the world, and it just doesn't work like that. When the light of bodhicitta goes off, the whole perspective changes, broadens. We see how much happier it is to be expansive and to be concerned for others. And when we look into the nature of self, we see that we are the other. He goes on. Under self-concern, when bad things happen, there's a tight anguish. When bodhicitta sees suffering in the world and takes it in, there is still room for joy. There is sorrow, but because of the expansive perspective, there is room for joy. It is not narrow. Gosh, we've talked about the Dalai Lama. Think about him. I mean, for 50 years, you know, he's been in exile, pretty much mostly unsuccessful, you know, lobbying for the rights of his people in his homeland. Pretty much. You think he might get a little hard, you know. But his capacity to keep his heart open in the face of 50 years, day after day, of really not getting much, you know, is just extraordinarily inspiring. And he says this, whenever I meet people, I always approach them from the standpoint of the most basic things we have in common. We each have a physical structure, a mind, emotions. We're all born in the same way, and we all die. All of us want happiness and do not want to suffer. Looking at others from this standpoint, rather than emphasizing secondary differences, such as the fact that I am Tibetan, or a different color, religion, or cultural background, allows me to have a feeling that I'm meeting someone just the same as me. I find that relating to others on that level makes it much easier to exchange and communicate with each other. we can all point to many kind of high-profile examples kind of manifesting that incredible bodhicitta, after the kind of liberation of South Africa and Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu and the kind of Truth and Reconciliation Commission and everything they tried to do there, which amazed the whole world that it just didn't fall into a giant race war. Hey, they got a lot of problems there, but what they did was amazing, And Martin Luther King, his work and vision. I think on one level, maybe the greatest tragic assassination that we've had in the last 150 years was his death. And the vision at the end of his life was so clear, and he knew what he needed to do going forward. So, and Gandhi, and all the U.S. congressmen. They manifest incredible bodhicitta, don't they? Sometimes. Just checking to see if you're listening. You're not listening. All right. Well, they're on the path. They're on the path. And everybody can be touched by this energy. Even people that are kind of regular people, fearful people, wounded people, this energy pulses in them. So I'll tell a little story about my father, one of the stories. I have a bunch of them, and this is one of my favorite ones. So, little background, born of an immigrant Irish family. There was like 11 kids in the family. 7 of them made it to adulthood. 4 of them died in childhood. No money, no much of anything. And his father died when he was 2. So he's basically raised by his brothers and sisters, mostly his sisters. So no education, 5th grade education, whatever, life goes on. Goes in the army. The war comes along, and serves with the 5th Army, land in Africa, fight their way up through Italy. The 5th Army still has the record for most consecutive days in combat, something like 700 straight days of combat. Comes back out of the war. Just prior to the war, he married my mother, who has her own kind of trauma background. But when he came back out of the war, very severe PTSD. And there's some kind of humorous sides to it. When he would sleep, and my mother might say, well, go wake him up. And I was born after the war. And she'd say, well, go wake him up. And she'd always say, well, be careful. You have to, if you touched him on this side, he'd come across with a left cross out of a dead sleep, aiming in that direction. Touch him on this side, he'd come across with a right cross. So you had to kind of be a little careful. I don't know how she survived in the bed with him all those years, but she did. So all my relatives would say, oh, you should have known him before the war. He was the life of the party, a really funny guy, But that's not the person who I knew, Had a kind of short, violent temper, no patience whatsoever, And so one night, I was in high school, and we lived in a little row house in New Jersey, about 800 square feet, 2 floors. We had the end unit, and you could hear paper-thin walls. You could hear everybody in the next unit. And next door to me lived a family. We had all kind of ethnicity. It was great, kind of in a way. There's an Italian family, and the oldest child there, and these are all 2-bedroom units, and even one unit, there's like 6 kids. Think about it, 2 bedrooms, 6 kids, okay? But next door was the president and leader of the North Jersey Aliens Motorcycle Club. He was my neighbor next door. And recently, during that time, they had closed down their clubhouse. They had a clubhouse in Paterson, New Jersey, and they were busted. So now the club meetings, the motorcycle meetings, were right outside our house on the street. So there would be 25 or 30 Harleys, all these guys. And this is back when tattoos were not like aesthetic fashion. Death before dishonor, love, hate. I mean, this is where it was happening. And so I'm doing my homework. I have this little porch and I'm doing my homework there. It's probably this time of year maybe. Yeah, it was warm. And I'm, they're revving their engines and all this stuff's going on. And my father glances out there and one of the guys is urinating in our yard. My father was a little guy. And he loses it. And he runs out there in the middle of them. And I'm like, oh, and he's reading them the riot act. He just wades right in the middle of them. SOBs, don't you have any manners? What kind of parents? He's going on and on. And so I go over to the door and put my hand on the baseball bat, which is always in the corner. Because in New Jersey, everybody has close by a baseball bat or a tire iron at least. Nowadays, it's probably worse. And I'm like, the door's a little bit open. It's like, he's going to get killed. I'm going to get killed if I go out there. And luckily, between fight, flight, and freeze was on full. And so I'm just watching. And finally, Jersey Jack, the president, our neighbor, he was off somewhere, and he comes wading in. Oh, we are so sorry, Mr. Coffey. This will never happen again. And then they get the cue. A couple of guys, oh, we're so sorry. I'm sorry, we were drinking some beer. We just couldn't, blah, blah, blah. We'll never do it again, Mr. Coffey. And so my father's starting to simmer down, So he comes back in. I go back and live the rest of my life. So I start doing my homework, and in a couple of minutes, I'm hearing this kind of rustling and grunting coming up from the basement, and this banging of metal. And so the old man he's dragging up these two toolboxes, goes past me, goes out into the street, and he spends the rest of the evening sharing his tools and helping these guys work on their bikes and drinking beer with them. It was like, well, where did that come from? How did he turn on a dime like that? It's that Bodhichitta. It turned, and then they were just a bunch of young kids. They weren't like the enemy or anything, and he just was right in there with them. So you don't have to be anything special to practice Bodhicitta, or you don't have to be healed or unwounded. It's there. Greater kindness to our family, co-workers, people at the store, everybody. We can just tap in and feel it. This from Sister Joan Chittister. She has a special compassion practice she does. She says, try saying this silently to everyone and everything you see for 30 days. So her mantra is, I wish you happiness now and whatever will bring happiness to you in the future. If we said it to the sky, we would have to stop polluting. If we said it when we see ponds and lakes and streams, we would have to stop using them as garbage dumps and sewers. If we said it to small children, we would have to stop abusing them, even in the name of training. If we said it to people, we would have to stop stoking the fires of enmity around us. Beauty and human warmth would take root in us like a clear, hot June day. So it said that when both relative and absolute bodhicitta are present, in other words, compassion and emptiness, that enlightenment is unavoidable. The power is that great. I'll tell another story. We're human, and our intention and motivation is to have this heart open all the time, but we stumble a lot. And then we get revisited by these stories, because we have this intention. And so it kind of highlights some of the times when we're not totally there. And some of you have spoken of that. So I remember a few years ago, and I still think of this guy. And I was working on a talk, and I was, my ego-centered gravity was in tight, and maybe the talk was even on loving kindness or compassion. That would be a real paradox. And so the dogs start barking, and you can tell there's different kind of barks. If they have a snake cornered, it's one kind of bark. If they got something else cornered, it's another kind of bark. But if it's a human intruder, it's a different kind of bark. So they go off, and I'm going, who the hell is, I kind of live out, who the hell's here? It's like I'm already, I don't have enough time to do all the things I do. So I go to the door, and it's this guy's driven up in a kind of broken down pickup truck, country guy, and he stutters a little bit. And he said, I was just seeing you got a pile of fence posts sitting up there near the road, might have some of them, And really, I was kind of, I know I had a kind of harsh look, like it wasn't welcome, it was more of like, what the hell are you doing here, And so I said, no, I'm going to, I'm going to need all those. Can't help you, Now, come on. Am I going to really need those fence posts? Maybe. And if I did, couldn't I go out and buy some? Yes. And did it look like this guy, it might have been something important, some project he was working on? So he left, And so I've been a little haunted by that, I have other chances, but it's little things like that. It's like, of course he's not going to come back and ask me anything anymore, But if anybody needs any fence posts, just, come on by. So we then have to find other opportunities and then forgive ourselves. We're not going to be perfect at this open-heartedness. Each breath is a brand new life. From Ryokan, truly, I love this life of seclusion, the wandering monk Ryokan. Truly, I love this life of seclusion, but by the universal sentiment of the Bodhichitta, of Bodhicitta, when I think about the sadness of the people in this world, their sadness becomes mine. Oh, that my priest's robe were wide enough to gather up all the suffering people in this floating world. What a great sentiment, And from Einstein, a human being is a part of a whole called by us the universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest. It's a kind of delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circles of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Yeah, he was a guy way more than his equations. He was really seeing and feeling some things. And so, yeah, sometimes we're all veiled over with our conditioning, our survival energies, our desires, whatnot. But that potential is always inherent. And if you just train a little, practice a little, that bodhicitta energy is available even in the times when we think everything is stacked against us, when we feel lost, helpless. If you take the time to look, allow that sacred pause. What's most important here? What am I feeling most deeply? You can find that love that's existing, that compassion that's there. And on the ultimate level of bodhicitta, you begin to get acquainted with the empty nature of mind. That mind of non-clinging, non-grasping. The mind that has moments, actual moments, that it's free of greed, hatred, delusion. That has moments that are absent of self-centeredness. And this simple practice you've been doing all week teaches you this, looking again and again at the nature of things, the nature of nature. So, summing up, it said that the precious relative bodhicitta is compassion, and the precious ultimate bodhicitta is emptiness. And with compassion and emptiness, enlightenment is unavoidable. So, if you can bring this aspiration of bodhicitta to the center of your life, that seed of bodhicitta really offers and allows expansive joy. Brings you out of yourself. Viscerally connects you with this whole creation. And connects you in a way that offers benefit to not just yourself, to the whole creation. So, I'm going to end with just a little piece from Whitman again. Pausing, searching, receiving, contemplating. Gently, but with undeniable will. Divesting myself of the holds that would hold me. I inhale great draughts of space. The east and the west are mine, and the north and the south are mine. I am larger, better than I thought. I did not know I held so much goodness. So let's just sit for just a moment together.